So today we'll relate to the questions that were sent in, and the first question relates to tomorrow evening and Friday, because it's all about Purim, and I'm quoting, "What is Purim all about? What is the significance of its customs? And what lessons can we learn from Purim?" Okay, I think this question encapsulates everything about Purim. So let's first cover the history of Purim, then we'll get to the lessons, and then we'll get to, maybe through the lessons, to some of its customs. So the history of Purim really takes us back to the 5th century BCE, in which the crazy Persian king by the name of, apparently it was Xerox, #1, had an evil advisor, Haman. I know you know the story, who decided that he wanted to exterminate the Jewish people. He was the Adolf Hitler of the day. And so he used the stamp of the king to decree that all Jews will be exterminated on the 13th of Adar, which is the Hebrew date. He knew all about the Jewish traditions. He knew about the Hebrew calendar. And he had a lottery to pick the date on which he wanted to carry out this decree. And the lottery fell on the 13th of Adar. He was actually very happy about it, by the way, according to the Talmud, because the fact that this lottery fell during this month of Adar was very encouraging for Haman. He said to himself, Adar is anyway a bad month for the Jewish people. It's a month with bad luck. How do I know this? Because Haman said to himself, Moses died on this month. And it's true. Moses died on the month on the 7th of the day of Adar. So he said, you see, the foremost leader died during this month. Therefore, it's a bad month for the Jewish people. And therefore, now I know that this decree will finally be carried out and the Jewish people finally will be exterminated. He did not know, as the Talmud points out, that Moses was also born on this month. He was born on the same day he died, 120 years earlier. And that is a sign that it's a great month for the Jewish people. But regardless, he decided that this will be the day when the Jewish people will die. And I'm going to make a very long story short. The leader of the Jewish people, Mordechai, then convinced his niece, Esther, to present a candidature to become the next queen. She was miraculously elected for her beauty, for her grace, as the story of the Megillah says. She had a lot of charm, a lot of kindness. The king picked her because of that. She became the queen. And when push came to shove, Mordechai went to Esther and said to her, okay, now you have to go and speak to the king. The time is running up. You have to go and convince him to annul this decree of his evil advisor Haman. She says to Mordechai, I'd love to go. Yes, I want to save the Jewish people. I know that's the reason I became the queen, but I can't. Why can't you? She said, because Achashverosh, even though I'm his wife, has to invite me for me to go to him. If I'm not invited and I show up, he can kill me. So Mordechai says, well, you have to do it. If that means that you're risking your life, let it be. And if you don't do it, redemption will come for the Jewish people, I'm sure, Mordechai says, from another place. And you'll be just a bleep in history. Your name, the house of your father will perish, in his words. And then he says to her, Umi yodea im le'et kazot igat lamalchut, which is my favorite verse in the entire Megillah, in the entire Tanakh even, entire Bible. He says to her, maybe it is for this moment that you became the queen. Esther is convinced. She shows up uninvited. Thank God Achashverosh was in a good mood. He says to her, yes, how can I help you? She says to him, well, I'd like to have a meal with you and Haman, your advisor. He says, fine. There's a whole story that happens in between that invitation and the meal, where Haman is asked to escort Mordechai out on a horse in the street. I won't go there. But the next day they have a meal. And then Esther says to the king, if you don't mind, I'd like to have another meal tomorrow. The king says, fine, but you have to tell me why you invited both of us, both me and the advisor, to this meal. She said, I'll tell you tomorrow. The next day comes. By the way, this was a brilliant psychological trick by Esther, because now the anticipation is just growing. And the second meal arrives on the next day. And then again, the king says, what can I do for you, Esther? And I'll do anything. I'll even give you half of my kingdom. And then Esther says, well, there's one evil man in your leadership that wants to exterminate me and my nation. And Ahasuerus, the king, becomes livid. He jumps out of his chair and he says, who could this be? And then she points to Haman, who's there by the meal. She says, it's this man. He in fact decreed that our entire nation should be wiped out. At that moment, another advisor of the king, Karvona, comes into the room. Also a miracle. And he sees Ahasuerus all angry, and he realizes that Ahasuerus is angry about his evil advisor wanting to kill the queen and her nation. And he says to her, by the way, Ahasuerus, king, Haman already set up a tree in his backyard on which he will hang Mordechai. The king now is even more upset because he knew Mordechai. He was friends with Mordechai. Mordechai had saved his life. So he says, you know what? Let Haman be hung on this tree. And thus begins the end of Haman, the end of his family, the end of his terrible decree. And very soon, the decree not only is annulled, but also is transformed. In many ways, the Jewish people become now the rulers. Mordechai becomes a part of the government. And the Jewish people are saved and are restored to royalty. That's the story of Purim. That happened again in Iran, some 2,500 years ago, 5th century BCE. Sorry? That's Esther's history. Oh, the rest is history, of course. Yeah, the rest is history. Exactly. Yes, that's what you said. Esther, yeah. The rest is history. But just you reminded me because I thought you said Esther. The whole story of Purim is named after Esther. She's really the one who single-handedly saved the Jewish people. Now, there are a few customs, a few even mitzvot that pertain to Purim. In fact, there are 4 of them altogether. Number 1, we mentioned it before, that's to listen to the Megillah both during the night and during the day, anytime during the day. Number 2, and I'll explain each of them, and I'll tell you how they relate to the theme of Purim soon too. But number 2 is to give charity to at least 2 poor people or poor organizations on the day of Purim, not the day before, not the day after, on the day of Purim. Matanot la'evyonim. Number 3 is to give or send, as it says, mishloach manot means to send food items to a friend, to someone else. To send means that you actually have to use an intermediary. You can't do it directly yourself. You have to use someone else to do it on your behalf. We'll explain the significance of that too. By the way, the food items need to be entirely edible. So you can't give a raw potato. You can't give coffee even. Coffee has to be mixed with hot water first. You can't give, I don't know, any raw item can be given if there are edible items, at least 2 edible items. But if those are the only items, then it can't be given. There has to be, again, in your basket, at least 2 edible items. That's mishloach manot. And number 4, to have a festive meal on the afternoon of Purim, after midday, before sunset. This year it falls on Friday afternoon, and we have to be careful because then Shabbat comes in, and you don't want to go into Shabbat without having the meal because then it will be too late. Then that meal will be considered the Shabbat meal and not the Purim meal. So you have to make sure to do it on Friday afternoon. Now, there are many reasons why we do particularly those 4 mitzvot. Reason number 1, we'll go over them, is because there's a common denominator to all these mitzvahs, and that is unity. Unity. When we read the Megillah, we have to unite together to listen to it, and we unite in listening. And when we give food baskets, we unite with our friends. Charity to the poor, we unite. Festive meals, we unite with our family and friends. So unity is the common denominator. Why is unity so important to the story of Purim? That is because the sensitive ear will pay attention to 2 words in the Megillah that point to the disunity of the Jewish people that brought about the decree of Haman, and the unity of the Jewish people that brought about the annulment of the decree of Haman and the miracle for the Jewish people. Which words? When Haman says, I'd like to exterminate this nation, he says, Yeshno am echad mefuzar umefurad bein ha'amim. That's one word. Haman says, look, there's a nation that is scattered and divided. Haman says divided, you know why? Because he says, I know, as all of our enemies knew, that when the Jewish people are united, no force can ever touch them. But when they are divided, that's when trouble can come about. So now they divided, he says. Oh, that's great. That means I can finally issue this decree. By the way, Sapir Cohen, who was here last year, who was a captive in Gaza for 55 days, she famously says, time and time again, she said it here at CBT for the first time, she said that during her captivity, one of the terrorists called her to watch a scene on the TV that was on, and it was the protests in Tel Aviv, where all Jews came together to protest for the release of the hostages. And then the terrorist turns to Sapir and says to her, look, you Jews, when you're like this, as Sapir put it, when you're like this, when you're united, then we can't even touch you. But it's when you're divided that we can be stronger than you. Same message by the Haman of the day that Haman then gave the Jewish people. Haman of the day, Hamas, said it to Sapir. When you're divided, and therefore the mitzvahs of Purim have to symbolize the opposite, the unity that gives us indeed the strength to overcome our enemies. Now, by the way, the other word in the Megillah is Esther, who was also not just wise, but saintly. She said to Mordechai, the only way I can do this, yes, you're asking me to go and speak to Achashverosh, but the only way I can really be successful is first and foremost if Lech Knosset Kol HaYehudim, go and gather all the people, all the Jews. If I see that they're united, then I'll have the strength to annul this decree. And she was right. When the Jewish people came in unity, that's when she then was able to overcome this decree and her fear and convince Achashverosh to cancel Haman's terrible plans. So that's why the common denominator between all these four mitzvot is unity. Another thing about these mitzvot is that they all spread happiness. And in many ways, that is yet another ingredient that enables us to overcome not just the enemies without, but the enemies within. When you're happy, when you're positive, when your mindset is encouraged, then you're able to overcome your challenges of life. But if you yourself are in despair, if you're sad, if you're pessimistic, that's when the challenges in life get to you. It's true for challenges within, and again, challenges and enemies without. And therefore, the theme of Purim is LaYehudim Aita Ora v'Simcha v'Sason v'Ikar, as the Megillah says, that the Jews must be filled with happiness. When we are filled with happiness, even the Hamans of the world cannot get to us. Now, it's not just enough to feel happy, but as we often say here, we have to do happy. We have to spread that happiness. And therefore, the four mitzvot of Purim. Think about this. We all live, whether you want it or not, we all live in four circles. There's the circle of me versus me, right? The person that I see in the mirror that only I know fully. Then there's me versus my closest friends, family members. They know me also quite well, but not as well as I know me. But that's another circle we live in, me versus closest friends and family. Then there's me versus my acquaintances. You can call them Facebook friends, Instagram friends, or whatever it is, or you can call them just people that you meet from time to time, but you're not really close to. That's another circle we live in. And then there's a fourth circle we live in, and that's me versus strangers, people you see at the gas station, at the supermarket, or in the streets. Our duty is to spread happiness to all four circles, because we have to not just feel happy, do happy. To do happy means to do happy in all four circles. And therefore, these four mitzvot, think about this. The Megillah reading is me versus me. That's when I listen to my words, to the words of the Megillah. I derive lessons from them. I'm learning. It's me versus me. The festive meal is me with my closest friends and family. Mishloach manot, the food baskets, it's me versus my acquaintances. That's the third circle. Charity to the poor is me versus at fourth circle, the others that I don't necessarily know. And by fulfilling these 4 mitzvot, we are then taking the theme of happiness and not just feeling it, but doing it in all the circles that we live in. That's why we have these specific 4 mitzvot also. The other reason, the other common denominator, so we said common denominator was number 1 was unity. Common denominator number 2 is happiness. One last common denominator of these mitzvot is that these mitzvot are mitzvot that are inclusive of more than one person. And it is reminiscent almost of what the Lubavitcher Rebbe said to someone who came to receive $1 from the Rebbe. As the Rebbe was giving dollars, every Sunday, he would stand there for 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours straight, just to give $1 to people and bless them with whatever they may need. And one day someone came to the Rebbe and said, Rebbe, I don't understand. Why do you have to give us $1? If the whole purpose is for us to meet, then let's just meet. Give me a blessing and can move on. Why $1? It's costing you so much money. And the Rebbe said that is because there can be a situation in which 2 people meet and a third one doesn't benefit from it, from that meeting. Every meeting between 2 people should benefit the world. Can't stay in that dimension. And here, same with the mitzvot of Purim. Yes, I am connecting to God, I'm connecting to my people, but it can't just stay there. It's got to benefit a third person. So the Megillah reading, I can't just do it for myself. It's got to be the reader and me, and hopefully the congregation too. The Mishloach manot, I'm sending the food basket. Remember, I'm using an intermediary. That's got to be, it can't just be me and someone else. It's got to be a third person. Same with the poor, at least 2 poor. It's mitzvot that carry at least 3 people each. And again, the reason is because it should remind us of this lesson that in Judaism, we must always think of the third, the person that might be excluded, consciously or subconsciously. And we must be able to think about him and include him in our mitzvahs. So that's the third common denominator. I would say it's called inclusivity, not just unity, but inclusivity. So these are the 3 common denominators between the 4 mitzvot of Purim. These are the mitzvahs of Purim. Now, there are customs of Purim that are not compulsory. One of them, we also mentioned before, is to get dressed up. The reason we get dressed up, first of all, it spreads happiness. It achieves that. But also it's because Purim is a dressed up story. In fact, if you read the Megillah, the name of God is not mentioned once in the story of the Megillah. It's almost as if God is dressing up. Because you see natural events, almost coincidences as they call them, but really it's God running the show from behind the stage. He's just dressing up. We dig a little deeper, we see miracle after miracle after miracle. So it's to represent God that he's dressed up. We dress up. But it also, if you go into the characters of Purim, you also see that they too are dressed up. Haman seems to be the wisest, but he's also the most evil. Esther seems to be a queen, but she's also hiding a Jewishness. She's also Jewish, or she's Jewish, but she's also a queen. And all these characters of Purim are also dressed up. And it's really to teach us the lesson that what you see is not what you get. There's always so much more than what the naked eye sees. And therefore, dare we not, to use the cliche, and dare we not judge a book by its cover, dare we not either accept or reject a person just based on his externalities. There's a soul in every body. There's a spark of light even in darkness. And as Rabbi Moshe Lev of Sassov, the great Hasidic master, would say, if you wish to find fire, you'll find it in ashes. Ashes might seem ashes, but if you dig a little deeper, you'll find that fire. That's the message of Purim. And that maybe is also why Purim is the happiest holiday, because when we don't judge a book by its cover, and we never despair until we never relent until we find that fire in the ashes, then it's the most rewarding and the most happy exercise that we can do. Then we'll never be disappointed, because Hashem has put a part of himself in each and every person, in each and every challenge, in each and every moment. So that's the other message of Purim. Just reminded very quickly, I don't know if I've ever shared with you the story, I just reread it. The story of the Yosele, the holy miser. You know the story of Yosele, the holy miser? It's a true story. And in fact, it can be corroborated if you go to Krakow, Poland. Has anyone been to Krakow in Poland? If you go to Krakow, Poland today, and you go to the Jewish cemetery of Krakow, Poland, you'll find that there are 2 graves buried outside of the cemetery. It's astounding because they seem to have been graves of people that were excommunicated. So what's the story? If you get closer to one of those 2 graves, you'll see that it's the grave of Rabbi Yom Tov Erlich, who was the chief rabbi of Krakow, Poland, who's a legend in Jewish history. So he is buried outside of the cemetery. Can be people excommunicated. What's the story? And the story is that about 400 years ago, lived a Jew by the name of Yosele in Krakow. And Yosele was the wealthiest Jew of Krakow, but he never gave a penny to charity. And they would ask him time and time again, and he would reject anyone who would ask for charity. At the end of his life, as he was lying on his deathbed, the rabbi of Krakow, Poland, Rabbi Yom, came up to Yosele and said, look, you're not going to take your money with you. You can't even take a penny with you. Just give your money to charity. Now, this can redeem you. And Hashem will forgive you for all the times that you didn't give money up until now. But this is your last opportunity. And Yosele refused. And Rabbi Yom Tov said to Yosele, look, if you don't give money to charity, money that people here in our town direly need, then I will make sure that the Chevra Kadisha doesn't bury you. And if they have compassion and decide to bury you, I'll make sure that they bury you outside of the cemetery. Yosele died. And Rabbi Yom Tov told the Chevra Kadisha, you guys do what you want, you don't have to bury him. He was left rotting in his home, in his mansion. A few days later, on a Wednesday, someone had pity, and in the middle of the night, they decided to go and bury Yosele, but outside of the cemetery. On Thursday, this poor person comes knocking the door of the great rabbi, Rabbi Yom Tov, and says, do you have money for me from the community for Shabbat? I don't have how to buy food. And the rabbi says, yes. 5 minutes later, another poor person comes. Do you have money? Yes. 5 minutes, do you have money? And the rabbi is not understanding. What did all these poor people do up until now? So he asked finally one of them, and he said, what did you do until now? Why this week? What's happening? The poor man says, I don't know what to tell you, Rabbi, but every single Thursday morning, all of us poor people would wake up and we would see an envelope filled with cash under our door. And that would suffice for us to buy food for Shabbat and everything. And the rabbi investigated, and he found out that it was Yosele. He was giving money anonymously to all of these poor people. So the rabbi immediately told the congregation, I need everyone to come to shul on Shabbat. Everyone came to shul on Shabbat in Krakow that weekend. And the rabbi said to them, look, I, as well as anyone here who has judged Yosele for being a miser, I have to ask for forgiveness from the neshama of Yosele. And because of me, he was now buried outside of the cemetery. So to prove my forgiveness, I am also asking this community that when I die, I be buried next to Yosele. And that's why if you go to Krakow, Poland today, even Google it, you'll see the pictures. You'll find 2 graves outside of the cemetery. One is of Rabbi Yom Tov, and the other one is of Yosele, and they added the word holy. They had Yosele the miser, but after finding out how charitable he was, what a righteous man, what a saintly man he was, they added the word Yosele Kamtzan Kadosh. the holy miser. But this is the story of Purim. We never know what we get. Yes. Mm-hmm.
I don't know the same one. But look at the prayer books at the Sidurim, and they were all donated by the man by the name of Lachman and his couple from Chicago. His father.
Oh, wow. In Poland. Yeah.
Have you been there?
No.
It's a very small cemetery.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you have to be Google ChatGPT if you want. But anyway, that's the story of Purim. I want to go, and I'm sure you have more questions about Purim or about anything else, but I want to cover these questions here quickly. Question number 1 here that was sent in. How long do you say a Misha Berach when someone is sick? That's a good question. So Misha Berach is obviously the prayer that we say for people that are sick, a prayer of healing. That's one of the Misha Berachs, there are many Misha Berachs, but that's one of the Misha Berachs. I'm sure that's what you're referring to here. But how long do you say it when Misha Berach when someone is sick? Until the person has left the danger zone. Once a person has left that danger zone, then you don't have to say Misha Berach. What this means is that if the person is out of the hospital, for example, or if a person has completed rehab and the doctors have given him permission to resume his life, his or her life, then that's when you say Misha Berach. As long as there's some type of danger, not just on a person's life, let me be clear, but on a person's health, then we can still continue to say Misha Berach. Yes?
So, somebody goes to have a surgery or even a test, is that appropriate to say Misha Berach?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, next question here. Are our animal and spiritual souls part of our blood? And is that why we are forbidden to eat or drink blood? So it's true that we are forbidden to eat blood or drink blood. Ki adam hu nafesh, as the Torah says, because in the blood resides the soul of the animal. And when you are eating that blood of the animal, then you are also consuming his soul, his character traits. And you don't want to consume those character traits of an animal. So you don't eat that blood. That's the reason we don't eat blood. In fact, we're very particular about that because not even allowed to have a drop of blood. I know that kids, for example, if they have a mosquito bite, they go like this, right? And they like suck the blood from the bite. Well, that could be a problem if you're an adult and you're following this commandment, which you should. And then you shouldn't even have a drop of blood. This is also why kosher meat is salted twice, not once, but twice in the process of kosherizing it. After it was slaughtered halachically, kosher meat has to be salted twice for a period of 24 hours. Why? Because the salt sucks out the blood. And we want to make sure that every drop of blood came out. So we salt it a second time. So we're very careful about this commandment. But the reason, again, is because we don't want to consume the soul of the animal, the character traits of the animal. Now, are our animal and spiritual souls part of our blood? So when it comes to human beings, our soul, I suppose the question is, does our soul reside in our blood? So the lower part of our soul resides in our blood. Hadam hu nafesh, the Torah says. And according to Kabbalah, there are 5 levels of the soul. The lowest one is the nefesh, is that soul that resides in our blood. That's the level of the soul that maybe has emotions, that interacts with this world, that gets affected by events of this world. There's a level of our soul that couldn't care less about this world, that is unfazed by anything. It's just one with God. And just as God is not changed by the events of this world, so too this level of the soul isn't changed by it. But that's it. Can I ask you a little favor, everybody? So Yaakov, my son, who's in a gap year, it's his birthday today, and he's video calling me right now. So all you have to do is say happy birthday. Let's do this. Yes, Yaakov Yura.
Abba, what's up?
Good, good. I'm in a class and I have a surprise for you here. Everyone wants to say 1 second. 1 second. I'll call you back. Okay? All right, yeah, I love you. Okay, bye-bye. Bye, I love you. All right, thank you. Thank you. All right. He's 19. 19, yeah. That's a big age. All right, thank you. So going back to the soul. That's the part of the soul that resides in our blood, not the part that, again, is completely divine, that is unfazed by the events of this world. Next question here is the reason people want to become closer to God because they have a part of God that is in their spiritual soul, and therefore that soul wants to be closer to its creator. No doubt. Yes, I think that's well put. That every one of us has what the Tanya calls chelek eloka mima'al mamash, a part of God, real part of God. And that part of God wants to always be one with its creator. This is also why, I'm sure you see it. I'm sure maybe some of you do it yourself, but when you pray, they call it in Yiddish, you shokel. You know that? You do that. Why do people shokel when they pray? Why do they do this? And you don't see that in other religions, at least not that I know of. But you shokel. Now, the deeper reason is because the soul is like a candle of man. That's what King Solomon's, the candle of God, sorry. That's what King Solomon says in the book of Proverbs. We're a candle of God because we have a fire here that is a part of the big fire of God himself. That fire this fire here wants to reconnect to that fire, so it flickers. And the shockling is the flickering of our divine flame, so to speak. Flickering that almost shouts, I want to reconnect to my source. I want to reconnect to the big fire, to God himself. So there's no doubt a lot of that in people wanting to become closer to God. They really want to become closer to their source. They want their little fire to rejoin the big fire from which it came. Yes. Yeah, I mean, shakel, the word shakel means to, how do you say this in English? Yeah, shake back and forth, exactly. Yeah, fidget. Shakel. That's it. It's like, yeah, whatever. It's like this. Shackling. Anyway, but davening means to pray. So you shackle while you daven. That makes sense. Yeah. Yes. Nefesh, right. Where does what? Sorry? The neshama, that's a good. So the nefesh is the lowest level, the fifth level, depending on which, where you come from. So that's the fifth. Neshama is the third. And you're right, the neshama is that part of our soul, of us, that is unfazed by this world. And by the way, you see it, I hate to say it, but you see it when people are dying. Just saw that on Friday. When people start to understand that this world is not as important as they thought it was, that events in this world and rifts in this world and problems in this world are really nothing. Where does that come from? The soul. The soul that essentially, is never affected by this world. It knows what's important, it knows what's trivial, and therefore the trivial is just nothing. When you operate on a neshama level, you're operating on a godly level. And when you're operating on a godly level, you're not too fazed by this world. And when people die, I think that they're transitioning to their neshama level, and because the nefesh is dying. So they start to look at the world differently, in a more divine way. Okay, just one last question here, and then we can open this up too. Please talk about those who convert to Judaism. How are they to be treated? A friend is being teased for converting. I never knew this could happen, so it needs to be addressed. Well, I'm sorry to hear that that's the case. It's against Judaism. It's against the Torah itself. The Torah itself has multiple commandments. Out of the 613, I think there's at least 4 that are devoted to how we should treat a convert. It says, "V'ahavtem et hager," we should love the convert. It says that we should be more sensitive towards the convert, and we should have as much accommodations made to the convert as we can, because they indeed are more sensitive, and understandably so. They feel that it's almost like I say the converts are like adopted children in a family. Not biological children, but adopted children. Adopted children, if you adopt a child, he's just as much your child as a biological child. And dare you not treat him differently. In fact, you have to treat him with even more sensitivity so that he doesn't feel like he's not part of the family. And so it is with converts. And a friend being teased because of conversion is just anti-Jewish. It's against everything we stand for.